This conference will now be recorded.
So the next slide just gives you an overview of the contents. Can we go on to the next slide? Sarah, are we able to go on to the next slide?
That's not me sharing the screen, that must be Suresh.
Oh, is it not? Oh, right. It's almost working. Oh, dear.
Use the arrow keys on your keyboard.
Let me ring him.
This conference will now be recorded.
The benefit of those who haven't, I'll just give you a brief overview of the background of the project and the tunnelling works and what dictated the alignment, and then I'll touch on the railway systems. So I'll look at the track and the install works, and then some of the systems which are more pertinent at the moment, so the tunnel ventilation and the signalling works. And then I'll go through some pictures of the stations to give you an update on those, and then the future works ahead of opening in autumn 2021, what's left to do on site, and then hopefully we'll have time for questions at the end. So next slide, Suresh. So this gives you a background of the area. You can see here, if you press the next button, Suresh. Thank you. So you can see here, this is the area. It's 200 acres, of space, and it's really the last jigsaw of central London, which is undeveloped. You've got 3 kilometres of river frontage. You've got Battersea Power Station, which has been disused since 1983, I think. And you have Nine Elms in the middle there, and then Vauxhall to the north. So it's a definite opportunity area. And if you click the next button, Suresh, you'll be able to see this is a CGI of the final area. So it's 20,000 new homes. Battersea Power Station, which is sort of the flagship for the area, as well as lots of other bits and pieces. So such a huge project obviously needs to be integrated into the existing transport infrastructure. So there's various studies, bus route segregation, light rail, and also London Underground extensions. They looked at extending the Victoria line from Vauxhall, Bakerloo line from Elephant and Castle, District line from Sloane Square, and the Northern line from the Kennington Loop. And the conclusion was that because of such a huge project, it needed to be delivered through an extension of the tube. Nothing else would do, really. And they decided to extend the Northern line Charing Cross branch because it would reduce pressure at Vauxhall Station for the Victoria line and also reduce pressure on the Northern line south of Kennington. Go on to the next slide. So some of the key programme requirements: 30 trains an hour to bring it in line with the modern signalling, efficient, safe and reliable, minimise environmental impacts. So I'll talk about how the track structure did that by minimising the ground-borne noise. Minimal impact on the existing railway, and integrated with the urban design, and fully integrated with other transport systems. Next slide. And then this is just an overview of the final project. So you can see the Kennington Loop in the black there, coming off the Northern line, and then so we have 2 new step plate junctions there, and then the 2 ventilation shafts, Kennington Green and Kennington Park. And then the 2 tunnels were dug using TBM, one for the northbound and one for the southbound, through to 9 Elms, which is a new station box, and then onto Battersea Power Station, which is interestingly the first underground station with the name station in its name, which isn't very helpful, but there we go. Next slide, please, Suresh. And then this is the tunnel alignment. So this is really what drove the final alignment of the track that we have today. Battersea station box, you can see in the top left there in the lighter yellow colour in the middle. That's right. And then the tunnelling went through the London Clay. There's an EDF cable tunnel and some sewers, which we kind of went in between there. And then there's a scour feature, which the tunnel boring machines dealt with very easily, through the London Clay into 9 Elms station box, and then underneath the Victoria line, and then into the Lambeth group, which is that darker yellow, darker orange colour, and it's traditionally a bit more unknown. There can be hard bands of rock obstructing drilling and piling there, but the tunnel boring machines dealt with those effectively. And then underneath the northern line, that oval station where there's existing escalators and other key assets, and then up back into the London Clay at the Kennington Loop, where it joined in with the existing network. Next slide, please. So we looked at what kind of dictated the vertical alignment, and from a bird's eye view, this is the horizontal alignment. You can see those tight curves there in the red where we had to get round oval cricket ground, part of the Transport and Works Act that we had in place to do these tunnels. You weren't allowed to go underneath the oval cricket ground. And then the Victoria line in the middle there, and then there's existing network rail viaducts and all that infrastructure. So you can kind of see the overall route there and how it was driven. So if you move to the next slide, Suresh. Yeah, so that's the whistle-stop tour of the tunnels and what dictated the alignment. And just to move on to the track, so if you click first, Suresh, and that's the step plate junction. So this was carried out in I think Christmas 2017, and this was the joining on with the existing Kennington Loop of the Northern Line, and then after that we went on to install the plain line track between Kennington shafts to the loop to join up the new points and crossings, and then onto, I think it's between Battersea and 9 Elms, then Battersea Power Station platforms, and then we did the plain line between Kennington shafts to 9 Elms, and then 9 Elms Station. So if we move on to the next, and then finished with Battersea crossover box as well, which is a scissor crossover, which allowed trains to change between platforms as they entered and left the tunnels, north and south line. So this is step plate junction, the first bit of works and probably the most logistically challenging. A lot of interfaces with the existing railways and relocating existing services, so it had continuity between the new project and the old project. Once all that was done, we then, during that work, we also constructed the new step plate junction around the existing Northern Line tunnels. So there's spheroidal graphite iron rings bolted together, and that's all hand dug around the existing structure. And then over a series of weekend possessions, we removed the existing cast iron tunnel segments to bring the Kennington Loop into the new step plate junction structure. And you can see the photos at the bottom there of the existing old track in the new step plate junction tunnel. So if you go to the next slide, we can see the points and crossings being built up. So they were built up at Progress Rail in Beeston, I think, Nottingham, and they were built up and inspected up there and numbered, and then disassembled, brought to site and rebuilt within the step plate junction. They were laid on these Sonneville blocks, which I'll go on to explain in a bit more detail. And then we had bespoke jigs and alignment, side alignment jigs which positioned and lifted up the track. And once the track was lined and levelled, at the point the crossings were lined and levelled, we were able to pour our stage 2 concrete to set the step plate junction in its final position. If we go to the next slide, we look at the plane line install, and we'll be able to see some of those details I've just explained. So the internal diameter was 5.2 meters. If you click Suresh, I think it's 5.2 or 5.2, and click again, it shows that the stage 1 concrete was poured first, and that was 1 meter depth. And that gave us our track bed to then go on to install the track. Next slide. So this is just a cross section. This is with 100mm cant applied on the track. So we have the Sonnerville blocks in the stage 2 concrete. In the stage 1 concrete, you can see beneath that. And then scupper drains on the side to take the drainage off the track. If you click the next slide, Suresh, we can see those Sonnerville blocks. So it's flat bottom rail on top of these Sonnerville low vibration track blocks. From the picture in the bottom left, you can see these are individual concrete blocks, and they sit on a resilient pad, and that whole system sits in a rubber boot, and that minimises the vibrations from cyclic loading of trains. It's the first time it's been used really extensively on the London Underground network. I think they're using it on Crossrail. I don't know. People in the school probably know if they are or not. And I think we've also used it for some junctions, I think at Walthamstow. But this is the first time it's been used extensively. And the Transport and Works Act that we had in place had a specification on the ground-borne noise. And this was a solution. And it also insulates the concrete block as well inside the rubber boot. If you click the next slide, we can see how the plane line was constructed. So the rail was delivered through on engineering trains in 91 metre sections, and also smaller sections were delivered through the mole holes, as well as the LVT blocks. They were delivered through the mole holes too. Typically, a 12-hour night shift would come in, and they do a 50 metre section at a time. So the night shift, they would lay the Sonnerville blocks out, clip on the rails, and then they'd lift the whole system up on these bespoke alignment jigs. You can see there's 4 bolts on each of those jigs, and that kind of allowed you to control your height and your cant and line and level it. And then on the side as well, strapped to the tunnel wall on the right there, you can see some horizontal jigs, and you can just readjust them, and that controls your horizontal alignment. So the night shift team would set that all up, carry out a final line and level, and then the next slide shows the day shift team coming in, and they would do the concrete pour. They carry out a final check, and they do the concrete pour again in the around about 50 metre section, and then they can remove those jigs, clean up the track and make it good, carry out, while the concrete's wet, carry out a final adjustment. And then the next slide shows the final complete package of the plane line. It's not with the conductor rail, but that would be how they traditionally, that's how they did it. If you go on to the next slide, we can see, I think it's the platform. Thank you. So this is one of the stations. The photo on the top left, that's just the concrete box base. The concrete, the station box base. And then the photo on the top right shows the formwork for the Conrail pedestals. And then the bottom left, that shows after the stage 1 concrete poured, you can see some square blocks, which are the tops of those formwork for the pedestals. And then the photo in the bottom right, that shows the track walkway, which was then poured. That gave us a bit of storage area and access while we were doing the works. Take that to the next slide. This shows the track structure. So the photo in the top left, again, you can see these jigs that are in place, and the photo in the bottom left shows the shuttering, and that forms your safety pit in the forefoot. And then these were the traditional, the Delcor RF167. It's in my notes, but don't quote me on that. I can't remember. And these were fixed directly onto the concrete, so they were cast in when the track was laid, when the concrete was laid. You can see the Delcors are wrapped in black plastic just to protect them during the pour. And the reason we couldn't use the Sonneville blocks here because of they would have intruded into that safety pit, so we fixed them directly to the platform. And I think we reviewed that because the train speeds are a bit slower here and the structure of the box is different to the tunnels, that you're less likely to have this vibration from the trains. And you can also see that photo on the right, which shows the final track on the platforms, is the black circles to the left of the rail. They're just where the jigs were, and there's the sleeving that protected the jigs so that they could be lifted out. And they were just cut off and grouted over and made good. The next slide, please. And then the final bit of track work, so we looked at the step plate junction, the plane line, and the platforms. The final bit was the Battersea Scissor crossover. This is 147 metres in length, and it was fabricated by Progress Rail in Derbyshire and numbered up again. This is assembled and brought back and brought down to site at Battersea. Go to the next slide, please. This shows the crossover being installed. It's 68 bespoke pieces of running rail. Can we go back? Sitting on 1,172 of these Sonneville blocks. And again, it was installed in a similar fashion. It was all levelled and lined. And then the stage 2 concrete was poured around the track structure. 88 aluminothermic welds and 4 new Shawlock electric points machines for controlling the points. Next slide, please. And then the Conrail, so we have the grout pads there. The top left, that's for the positive rail, and then the negative rail in the forefoot. The holes there are drilled, and then there's plates of varying thicknesses, 2, 3, and 5 mil, I think, which allowed for variances in the concrete finish on the top. So the conductor rail was installed on top of those. So the next slide just shows how the track was installed. It was installed over 206 day shifts. Can you go back to the next slide? Thanks. Over 42 weeks, it's 110,700 operative hours, and it was about 50 metres a day. So it was very, very good progress on the track, and it was completed, I think, around mid-2019. So that was a kind of the overview of the track install. And then I'm just going to briefly touch on the signalling works, and because it's very pertinent at the moment, we're commissioning the new signalling system and testing it. So for the benefit of those who aren't as familiar with the signalling, I do just want to give you kind of a whistle-stop tour of the basics before we can understand what we're doing on the Northern Line extension to extend the railway. So apologies if you do know this, you probably do, but for the benefit of those who don't, I do just want to quickly go through. So if you go to the next slide, it just shows a fixed block signalling system which the Northern Line extension has run on since the 1920s, and it's very reliable, but it's a bit clunky and you can't get many trains on. Fixed block signalling is train enters an area and another train can't enter that area until it leaves, and the signals change and that train can then enter that block. What we have now, and it was installed in 2014 on the Northern Line, is transmission-based train control. This is where each train will transmit its own signal, and it allows trains to squeeze closer together, so each train transmits its own moving block, and we can get more trains on the Northern Line. So if you go on to the next slide, it talks about the various subsystems of this TBTC system. First subsystem is the VCC, the Vehicle Control Center, and this is your brain of the signalling system, and it does all the controlling, and it provides the necessary functions to support automatic train operation. DVTC is automatic train. It's press the button and the train goes, and it can run also in manual. And it's a vital safety critical piece of equipment. The next slide shows the picture of the VCC. It's just 3 computers, each performing the same function. You can see there underneath the screen, there's 3 of the same computers. And as long as they're all saying the same thing, essentially the train will receive the command. If each computer is saying different things or receiving different information, it's fail-safe, so it will shut down. That's kind of how it operates in a nutshell, and that's why there's 3 of them all transmitting the same information. And then the photo on the right shows a map. It's not all controlled by one VCC, it's controlled by 8 VCCs, the Northern Line. And that's determined by how many points and crossings there are and sidings. So the areas that are sort of split up that way. And as part of the Northern Line, we're installing VCC 9. So we're coming off the Kennington loop, which is at VCC 2, and we're installing a brand new vehicle control centre at Highgate Service Control Centre, and that will form the Northern Line extension, this VCC 9. If you go to the next slide, this is about the second subsystem, the vehicle onboard controller, and that's your computer which talks to the VCC and sits on the train, and it tells you the speed and everything and the position. If you go on to the next slide, the way that the VOBC and the VCCC talk to each other is through this red loop cable. And this red cable is inductive, so it transmits via an antenna at the bottom of the train. And on the Northern Line extension, because we're using the Sonneville blocks, the track structure was slightly different, and the top of the rail was a bit higher than traditional ballasted track or just fixing directly using base plates. So because the Sonneville blocks created a greater distance between the top of the running rail and the bottom of the forefoot where the red cable lies, the red loop cable lies, there was concern that the antenna wouldn't pick up the information and the signal wouldn't be strong enough. But we did some tests prior to installing this red cable, and the tests were all fine, and the distance was okay. So if you go to the next slide, I think it shows us one of the last subsystems which I want to talk about. It's a system management center. So this is the controller, and one controller will control one VCC. So for the Northern Line extension, we installed a new desk at Highgate Service Control Centre, which controls the whole of the Northern Line, this control centre. So we installed a new desk there, and that desk will control Nine Elms and Battersea and the Battersea crossover box. So last year, if you go to the next slide, it will show the works we did last year, and that was bringing the, this was Christmas 2019, so yeah, it was last year. This is bringing points 15 and 23, which are at Step Plate Junction. It was bringing those into VCC2, and we installed new axle counters, and the axle counters are your secondary means of detecting the train, positioning the train. And by installing and commissioning the points 15 and 23, we were able to then control them through the VCC2 at Highgate Service Control Centre. And then the points were clipped and left, and we carried on works for the year. And then phase 2, which is the next slide, is all about commissioning VCC 9. So this is where we ran our test trains over Christmas this year. And we also introduced a new sigging equipment room at Battersea Power Station. And all the sigging equipment, I think we have 8 new remote loop boxes. You can see the photo in the bottom left there is one of the axle counters that we've installed. And then on the right, you can see the red cable being carried over some of the points, probably at Battersea, that'll be Battersea crossover. And this is all the work that's really going on at the moment. So if you go on to the next slide, just to tell you about the testing that we're doing. So at Christmas, we had our first test train on the network. It was a huge achievement for the project. And I think there's around 100 tests, testing all sorts of things and making sure that it's reading and going to Highgate Service Control Centre okay. And they all passed by mid-January. So the next stage that we're going to go into over the next couple of months is multiple train testing. So we're going to bring more than just one train and see how the trains communicate with each other and all of that stuff. And then once multiple trains have been tested on the Northern Line, we'll move into trial operations, which will begin around early summer, ahead of the autumn opening in this year. And trial operations essentially says it all works, and we give the railway over to the operator so they can carry out all their training and familiarisation and basically test everything else, ticket gates, all your PHPs and all the bits and bobs that make a railway work. They can carry out those operational tests and basically get ready for passengers. So that will be early summer, around June this year. We'll move into trial operations. And then if we go on to the next slide, I'm aware we've overrun with the late start. I want to leave questions till the end. So actually, Suresh, can you just skip through the tunnel ventilation? Because otherwise I think it would take up too much time. My main point, as Suresh just skips through this, was that we're installing a modern tunnel vent system, which is, when you compare to existing London Underground systems, is way and above what we have at the moment. But this is what you need to do to achieve a compliant ventilation system on a new railway. And if we had the space and capacity on the existing London Underground, it would be wonderful, but we don't. So yeah, I'll just briefly say that we've commissioned the fans at Kennington Park and Kennington Green. So we run them up to full speed and they all work okay. We then have to commission the fans at Nine Elms and Battersea, run them up to full speed, and that will be over the next few weeks. So just to finish the presentation, I'll just give you lots of photos really. I've been relying on photos working remotely to carry out my job. So we do have lots of them, but I've just picked out a few good ones here. And this is Battersea Power Station, which you can see there's two entrances at the top, and the escalators then take you down to the ticket hall level underneath at basement 1. And then you go down 2 further escalators onto the platform level. So the next slide shows you what the site is looking like from the outside. You can see the oversight developments are taking shape. So the picture in the top right, that's just a CGI image. And you can see the roundel in the concrete there, and the supporting steel work on the roof and the glass finish. So it's not too far behind, and there's lots of external landscaping works to be done and drainage works ahead of finishing. And the next photo shows a view inside that head house that we just saw. So this is the gold cladding, and that cladding will carry out onto the outside as well. And that's as you come up the escalators at Battersea Power Station. And the next slide shows ticket hall level. We've got the gates delivered, ready for install. And some of the cladding on the roof has been installed. And then the next slide shows track level, and the gold detailing in the ceiling there. That photo on the left is one of the platforms. And then the next slide, we'll move on to Nine Elms. So Nine Elms, one entrance at the top there where the ticket hall is, and then you go down the long escalators onto track level. If you go to the next slide, you can see some photos. So this is from the outside. The photo on the top right shows the oversight developments. So once we've finished our station, the oversight developers will come in and it's ready. The structure is ready to receive the oversight developments. And the next slide shows another view from the outside. And there'll be retail units in there and a bit more landscaping works. And then there's photos from the inside. this shows ticket hall level, and then if you go to the next one, you can see the platform level. There's a lot of construction stored, materials being stored down here, so you can't get a very good image, picture, but that's how it's coming on. And then this is Kennington Green shaft. So the cross section there, you can see the head house, which is just to the top left of the CGI image. So the head house then goes down, and there's sort of 4 basement levels really. Yeah, that's where the head house is. And then if you go to the next slide, you can see how work's progressing on the landscaping. So that's the head house there on the left, Kennington Green. Go back up. I think there's a bit of a lag between pressing the buttons. So yeah, that was Kennington Green, and there's landscaping works going on. And yes, so you can see here the head house on the left, and the new pavers installed. And that photo in the middle shows the border for the green being installed, and then on the right you can see the trees along Kennington Road. They're being installed now. So it's looking, yeah, the area will look really nice. It will certainly be an improvement once we've finished. And then Kennington Park shaft. This is within an existing park. You can see the cross section there, similar to Kennington Green. And you go to the next picture, next slide, you can see pictures of Kennington Park, which is just slightly behind in terms of progress. They're still finishing some of the details on the louvers for the ventilation on the head house. And there'll actually be access hatches which will be cast into the landscape as well. So you could dig up the pavers or dig up the grass, and then you can access the tunnel vent if needed to extract them, and also you can access the substations, so you can lift things up by a hatch. So remaining works, like I said, we have trial operations still to do around the spring, early summer, and that will entail a lot of training and familiarisation for LU Ops. And then there's the external works around the sites, which still need a good go. There's a lot of drainage works and a lot of landscaping, soft and hard landscaping. And the fit out is ongoing. There's obviously comms, fire, electrical, low voltage, your air cooling, all your small bits of MEP and all your big bits of MEP. And also in Kennington Station, we have a substantial amount of work there to do. We're opening up 4 new cross passages. So they're nearly finished. There's work to do on 1 more of the cross passages at Kennington Station. So because of the Northern Line extension, there are going to be more people coming from Battersea, and then they're going to want to change from Charing Cross to Bank. So because of that increase in usage, we've had to install new cross passages in the platform. So there's 4 new cross passages at Kennington Station. There's also going to be 4 new smoke doors, 8 new smoke doors at the entrances to the platforms. And this is so that we're brought in line with, because of the tunnel vent system that we're installing, this brings us into fire compliance at Kennington Station. And then there's the handover and assurance, which is a lot of my bag as project engineer, making sure that the contractor has delivered the works to specification and everything is in place to give over to maintenance and keep them happy. So that's kind of it really from me. It's good that I've just skipped over the tunnel fan system, because it means we've got questions if you have any. Hopefully I'm able to answer them. See.
Okay, if you do have any questions, if you can type them into the chat function. I've got a few potentially starters with. So probably first one, do you think that a wider tunnel might mean no noise in the train?
Do I think a wider tunnel will mean more noise in a train? I'm not a tunnelling engineer, but that's a good question. I think Yeah, I think the track system that we have in place is sound, because I think we've learned from, I believe they've installed it at Crossrail, and we will be carrying out tests as well on the, we'll be carrying out tests once we've got trains running within nearby residential properties to make sure that we're in the limits that were set out. But sorry, I can't answer that question. I'm not sure if the larger structure, but I know that fixing direct the concrete track would have.
It's a phenomenon that sometimes occurs from experience on the Jubilee line. So I've got some other questions. What is the plan for further extension of the Northern Line?
I think at the moment the main plans are looking at Bakerloo line extension ahead of any further extension of the Northern Line. That's kind of what I'm led to believe. And any major developments will look at going from Elephant and Castle and south from there.
Okay, on the ventilation system, have any tests or assessment been done for using the rail grinders or the rail milling machines?
Not to my knowledge, for specific maintenance activities. I'm sure if the maintainer is carrying out tasks and there's possessions for those tasks, then it can be organised so that the fans can be operated as they need to be. It's a very simple system to operate as long as it's controlled correctly. So I'm sure it could be, as long as it's safe to do so.
Okay, I've got next one is there any drainage along the length of the tunnels other than I think you pointed out some channels on the cross section?
Yeah, so they're the scupper drains. It all runs. There is other drainage as well, and it all runs. There's three cross passages between the northbound and the southbound tunnel, and in one of those cross passages we have a sump. So the drainage in the tunnels, which is your water management system really, will be pumping the water from the cross passage and out of the system. And there's also sumps at the shafts, and I believe they're at the stations as well. So yeah, there is a lot of other drainage.
Next one is probably asking if, now you've obviously got some tests running, have you had any sort of results back from the ground-borne noise yet, or not?
No, not yet.
Right.
Yeah, not yet. It's something that needs to be done.
Right.
Yeah.
A couple from Phil Gallagher. First one is, has the track maintainer been trained on the new components, or is he going to get training?
Yeah, I'm sure he will get training. If you wanted to email me, we have a couple of contacts who are who are liaising with maintenance and with the trade unions as well. But if you wanted to email me, I have put my email there because it's a good question and needs to be flagged early. The sooner we start organising these things are better.
Probably next one is just a little probably clarification. We've obviously got pits on suicide pits on this railway, and that obviously means that I assume we don't have passenger edge doors on this one.
No, we don't have the passenger edge doors.
Okay, and another one from Paul Ebbett. How do you think having a design and build contract has worked?
How do I think it's worked? I think, firstly, Flow have been, from my experience, I'm quite early on in my experience. From my experience, the Flow have been very good as a contractor. I'm just trying to think about alternatives to the design and build. If we did the design in house, or if we got another contract to do design, and then yeah, no, it's a difficult question to answer in my experience, but I think it's worked well.
I guess if you've not had, have you had much experience of the different types of contracts?
Yeah,
You probably see the benefits and the disbenefits of each one.
Yeah, I've had experience where we, as LU, have been the designer, and it had its problems, and then I think the main issue, I would say, I don't want to get into too much of the contract, but the main issue I'd say is that with a design and build and a self-assuring contract as well, you have to be careful that you're not doing the job twice in the checking and the assurance, because that can be costly to us. And Flo are a fantastic contractor, and it's that trust which is there, I think, in their design, but it's what you have to be careful with, I think, is doubling the workload in the assurance process and the checking that you're doing. Yeah.
I think we'll go for one final question from Phil Gallagher on here, which is, what do you have a target opening date that you're willing to stake your life on, probably?
Yeah, autumn 21. That's the line at the moment. There's not an actual date that I know of. There might be a date.
A very famous thing in modern railways said, never trust a date that's based on the season of the year.
Yeah, I know that's what Crossfed are doing at the moment as well. They're giving a season rather than a date. But we did. It was originally 2020. I think we should already have been open, but there was kind of an agreement back in before I joined the project in 2018, where we had a bit of settlement and re-looked at the program and built a bit more float into the program, and I think that's also helped us with COVID. To my knowledge, we've coped well with that setback. So it hasn't that date we reset in 2018. We reset it to autumn 21, so that we should be okay for that.
Okay, thank you. Can I ask Paul Ebbett, who's volunteered to do the vote of thanks, to deliver that as someone who was there at the very start, I guess?
Yeah, hi. So I could put the camera on as well, couldn't I? Just so you can see. So, hi, thanks very much, Nick, for the overview of the Northern Line extension. Perhaps a little unfair on one or two of the questions that may be there, but it was just to try and make it interesting. It was, of course, totally interesting, the whole thing, and I'm very grateful for the visits that you arranged with the Northern Line extension project. It seems ages ago now, and we look forward as a section to go and ride on the system and have a look around the completed station with you. And it's great to have an insight to the works that some of us had the privilege of visiting, and as I say myself, had the privilege of working with the contractor and the developers, and so I'd like to invite everybody to thank you in the traditional way for the great insight, and thanks for answering the questions tactfully. And look forward, as I say, to travelling on it this year. So if anyone would like to unmute, we can try a clap. And thank you, Nick and Suresh, for supporting the presentation. Okay, unmute and let's have a clap. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much.